I love therapy, and in fact, I've been going to therapy since I was around 6 years old. Though I talk about therapy a lot and may interview some therapists on the show on occasion, nothing that is said in this podcast should be considered a replacement for therapy. If you are struggling, I urge you to please seek guidance from a therapist because you are absolutely worth it. Everyone, this is Wine, Dine, and 69, a podcast about dating, relationships, sex, and self-love. I feel like I should be recording this in more of a whispery ASMR voice. My apartment has been very quiet all day, and I kind of surprised myself when I started talking. Just the volume kind of came out of nowhere and surprised me. And I'm recording this very late, much later than I would normally record an intro. But, what are you going to do? Hey, it's a bonus episode. It's our second bonus episode. Like I said when I aired Allison's bonus episode, our first, I have a very large backlog of interviews and I want to air them. And sometimes, something comes up, like somebody has a workshop that they want to promo, or, in the case of Allison's interview, it was PMDD Awareness Month. In this case, my guest has a book that just came out. My guest today is Geoff Lamb. He is a psychotherapist, and he just released a book called Sexual Grounding Therapy, Context, Theory, and Practice, and it came out on May 17th, 2021, just last week. So because I had it, I figured it would be a good time to release it. He's doing promo for his work right now, and I have the interview, so let's do it. And I have the interview, so we're gonna air it. I'm excited because this is the first male guest that I am airing. I've done a few interviews in the last couple weeks with some male guests, but this is the first one that I'm actually getting to air. So that is exciting. Always good to have different types of opinions and different types of people. Very important to me, and for the ethos of this network in general, actually. So that's very exciting. A cool fun fact is that Geoff's book was published by Routledge, which is a company that I don't remember. It's been quite some time. Maybe is a subsidiary, but is somehow connected to a company that I actually worked for a number of years back, and that I actually made some of my closest friends working at this company. So I thought that was just kind of a neat little connection. This is definitely an episode in which you are going to want to check out the episode notes. We discuss a number of different psychotherapists, some of which I had never heard of, lots of different books that Geoff mentions, and people to study. So this is an episode that's going to be chock full of different things for you to read up on and learn more even after you're done listening to the episode. Loved all of these resources. I can't wait to dive into them myself. Another cool thing that Geoff sent me after our interview was a article on The Guardian called Love in an Old Climate, Posters Celebrate the Joy of Sex in Later Life. And that's what we talk about today. We're talking about development, sex, aging, relationships, and how those things change as you get older. Because you get a little bit older and your body's changing, and you've been with the same person maybe for a longer period of time, that doesn't mean that sex goes away. That doesn't mean that sex is off the table and we don't really talk about it a lot. But older people have sex too, and rightly so. And I hope that I'm having awesome sex when I'm older too. That's what I hope for. So yeah, these images are absolutely beautiful. And I would encourage you to look them up. I'll probably post them on my Instagram, and I'm definitely going to put them in the episode notes. So check them out there. Very cool. I told a friend about this interview. We were out for like happy hour or something, and I had mentioned that I was going to do this interview, and the next day she sent me the same photos from the same article on The Guardian. I was like, oh my gosh, my interviewee actually just sent me this. So really cool, really relevant to what we're talking about today. So I'm not going to blather on for much longer, partially because it's late over here, but also because I kind of just want you to start learning from what Geoff has to offer. Check out the book, check out the resources, and maybe we'll have him back on here at another point in the future. Just such a wealth of knowledge. So give me your feedback, rate, review, subscribe, and follow me on all of the socials: YouTube, Instagram, Facebook. There'll be some more socials coming out at some point. I'm really resistant to the idea of getting a TikTok as a millennial, but I know that I will. The poll is strong. The poll is strong with TikTok, so you'll be able to find me there eventually. Okay, everyone, going to cut to a quick commercial here and then enjoy my interview with Geoff Lamb and check out his book, Sexual Grounding Therapy, Context, Theory, and Practice.
Hey there, I'm Megan Martin, and I put the manic in Manic Pixie Dream Girl.
And I'm Janelle Megan, and I'm a self-proclaimed Bond girl, and I make every conversation way too deep.
We're both professional actors, producers, and models.
Cause and Creation is a podcast where we talk about all things creative, including interviewing other awesome artists that are breaking new ground.
We'll be taking a deep dive into who they are, the work they do, and more importantly, what moves them as artists.
You'll get an inside look into the minds of award-winning filmmakers who are promoting new content, writers who are on the first draft of their novel, video game designers who are creating a whole new world from scratch, and so much more.
If you want to get to know creative, or just want to get to know us, come hang out with us at Cause and Creation every other Thursday.
Cue the applause.
Hello, everyone. Welcome back. I am here today with my guest, Geoff Lamb. Geoff, how are you doing today?
I'm really well, thank you.
Great. I am so excited to talk to you. This is a topic that everybody's going to deal with at some point in their life. So today we're going to talk about relationships, sex, and aging. Super excited. So to start, how about you tell me a little bit about yourself, like how you got started in this research, what interests it about you, and just about yourself in general.
Okay, so I've been practicing as a psychotherapist for probably 36 years now. I started in 1985. And originally I trained in a model of psychotherapy which was based on the work of Wilhelm Reich, who worked a lot with sexuality way back in the 1920s in Austria. So I guess sexuality has always been part of my work, having had that influence. I then went on to train as a couple therapist, and so I was working a lot with relationships. And then more recently, I trained in psychosexual therapy, particularly the work of a guy called Willem Poppeliers. And so I started working more explicitly with sexuality and sexual relationships.
That's really cool. So what kind of work have you been doing with clients? Is it mostly talking through things? And how did you start to get into like the actual subject of aging and sexuality?
Okay. Well, there's two different things there. One is, when I'm working with clients, it is mostly talking, but I'm very much centered on people's awareness of their own bodies. So either with individuals or with couples, I will suggest exercises that they can do either on their own or together to increase their sense of their own comfort with their own bodies and being more familiar with how their bodies work, particularly sexually, and also with the couples of how they can make both emotional and sexual contact at the same time. So particularly, just for example, I will get people to do a lot of eye contact exercises as a way of becoming, connected with one another at an emotional level before you get down to connecting sexually. And I've often found that couples find this quite challenging because that's not something people do. And it's lovely if you can have eye contact with your partner during sex, but a lot of people don't do it, and it's always surprising to me in a way that it's not something that people generally do, but that's something that I do. Coming back to this issue of sexuality, relationships, and aging, one of the things that the method of psychosexual therapy I trained in, which is called sexual grounding therapy, one of the principles that we work with there is lifelong psychosexual development. And that's quite unusual, I guess, unique in that I guess most developmental models of psychotherapy and psychosexual therapy assume that our development is more or less complete by the time we become young adults. Whereas I think the sexual grounding model tends to follow the sexual development and look at how sexuality evolves as we get older. So that really interested me. And obviously, not obviously, but since I've been practicing for 36 years, I'm not in the first flush of youth myself. I'm 69 years old. And so obviously some of this is also involving my own personal experience of my own sexual life and how that has evolved over the years. And that's an interest to me, of course.
Definitely. And it's so fascinating that, have you read Esther Perel?
Have I read Esther Perel?
Yes.
I've read some of her work. I think the particular book I read was on it was called The State of Affairs.
Yes.
And at that time I was working with, couples who had affairs, and I just wanted to get a different approach to it. I think what she says seems to match quite a lot with how I work.
Definitely. I mean, she has a podcast about couples therapy, and she does the same thing about the eye contact exercises. And
Indeed, yes,
it's really fascinating. I really admire that work. One of her other books is called Mating in Captivity, and it talks kind of about when you are together for a long time, there is some like mystery that is lost. So I guess one of the questions that I have for you is, life is long, and a lot of people get married in their 20s, their 30s, and maybe they get married later in their 40s or 50s. How do you maintain a exciting, sexual, vulnerable, intimate life with your partner over such a long period of time?
Yeah, that's a really important question, and it's one that does come up quite a lot in my work. I guess the key word that you use there is exciting. And I think there's a lot of confusion around excitement. When we first get together in a couple relationship, everything about the relationship is exciting because it's new. And we are excited by each other. We fall in love with each other, at least I hope we do. And, there is this idea that I found this person at last who really understands me, who really gets me. And, having sex with them is different. And So there is that initial excitement. But of course, as you're saying, this does not last. There's no way that it can, because we get used to each other. We get used to how the sexual contact that we make with each other is. And I guess if we're not aware of that, or if we're still looking for that same kind of excitement that we had at the beginning of the relationship, say 5, 6, 7 years into the relationship, then we're obviously going to be disappointed. And that's, what Esther Perel writes about, particularly in the book about affairs, that there is a sense, one of the things that she says that resonates very much with me and the way I work is that an affair can often result from the fact that I have a feeling that I can't express all of me in this relationship, that I can't explore the whole of my sexuality and other parts of my personality. But that's, she uses that as a way of explaining affairs, and that makes sense. Mm-hmm. But in the way that I work is that I work with couples and individuals to ask themselves the question, well, how come I'm not allowing myself to express all of me? Now, one of the things that happens in this is that we blame that on our partner.
Yes.
So if she was less uptight, I would be able to be more adventurous sexually, whatever we mean by that. Okay. Or variations on that kind of theme, Well, actually, that's putting too much responsibility on the other person and not really looking at what it is in you that stops you expressing the whole of you and in the relationship. One of the particular things I look at, and it, as I say, comes also from that eye contact exercise, is the idea of vulnerability in sex.
I think that's so important. I'm just not everything that you're saying right now.
Thank you.
Nodding. Yes.
Okay, yeah, I can imagine. So one of the things that often we expect for all sorts of reasons, and there are so many different reasons for this, is that we tend to kind of regard sex as a performance. And so typically a lot of men are very concerned that they are able to get an erection and to last long enough to give the woman an orgasm. And actually, I think when I talk to a lot of women, you can tell me if I'm right here, women don't actually like that. It puts too much pressure on them another way. And for women, maybe as a response to that, but maybe something in themselves are putting themselves under pressure to have an orgasm, to be ready for sex when they maybe aren't or whatever. So there's a lot of pressure involved.
Absolutely.
And when you're doing that, then you are closing yourself off to your own intimacy with yourself and your intimacy with your partner. And especially, you're not allowing yourself to be vulnerable with your partner. And, but the other thing, just coming back to this business of excitement, being vulnerable with a partner, I find, is intrinsically exciting because you're letting go of control. So you don't know what's going to happen. You don't know how it's going to be. You don't know how the sex is going to be. You're not sure, what mood or frame of mind your partner is in. You're not sure quite how your body is going to be. And allowing that is exciting in itself. So then you don't have to look for this kind of highly stimulating kind of excitement, which it is at the beginning, everything being different and a new partner and everything. You can relax from that. You can go more into intimacy. You can go more into discovery of who I am sexually, who my partner is sexually. And that is exciting in itself.
Absolutely. That's so well put. And yes, I think you're completely right. In my experience, when a guy is under pressure to perform, it puts pressure on the female in the equation, or the person
Yes.
with the vagina. And I mean, women have to mentally be there to be able to orgasm, and it's especially hard to orgasm from penetrative sex. And so,
Yes, indeed.
the mindset's so important. And I also think it goes both ways, though, where if a man is having issues withholding, I'm sorry, wow, not withholding. If a man is having issues maintaining an erection,
Yes.
I think that women have a tendency to take it personally.
That is true. I come across that a lot. It's very difficult to overcome that sometimes in couples.
So I do think it goes both ways.
Very much
really,
so.
Really interesting. I think ultimately we just, being a little bit kinder to each other and being less hard on ourselves.
I think that you're absolutely right there. I think, most times when couples present to me with what they think is a physical problem, one way or the other, the woman doesn't get wet enough, or maybe she's too tight, or whatever it is, or the man, as you say, doesn't find an erection, there is nearly always an emotional and relational issue going on between the two of them.
Yes.
And the tragedy is that we either think in terms of, well, it's his problem or her problem. And actually, it's not. It's a relationship problem.
Right.
And when the relationship is working, actually, erections don't matter that much. There's loads of intimate things you can do which don't need an erection. Of course, it's lovely to have penetrative sex. But if you take the pressure off yourself by thinking, actually, well, we just want to spend time and be intimate with each other, and maybe penetration will happen, maybe it won't, but we're not going to put pressure on ourselves. That's the best sex for me.
Absolutely. Because sex ultimately is about connection and being intimate. And
yeah, absolutely.
And it's not, orgasms are great, right? But
indeed, they are, very much so.
My partner and I say all the time, we're like, it's not about that. So sometimes, I'll start feeling a little insecure or something if, he doesn't come.
Sure.
And to his credit, he never asks me. He's very confident.
I know. That's really nice.
Fun. But, sometimes I'll get a little self-conscious and be like, but it's not about that. It's about feeling close and about connecting on a deper level. So
I think you're absolutely right. Do you know the person who, again, is another influence on me? I was trained in sexual grounding therapy, which I'll talk more about. But, have you come across the writings of Diana Richardson?
It sounds familiar, but I don't.
Yeah, she wrote a book called Slow Sex, which is really brilliant. It's basically saying the same thing as we're just saying, actually, this is about connection, this is about intimacy, and maybe orgasms aren't important at all. And she runs these lovely workshops, which I've been on, in fact, where you have sex with your partner privately in your own room. It's not anything untoward like that, but you deliberately don't have an orgasm.
Yeah, it's like edging, but like with a partner.
That's that. Or I think there's something I think you did have in America called Careza. I don't know if you've come across that.
Ooh.
I read about it in my research for my book. It was, I think I can't remember the spelling of it. I think it's spelled with a K, Karezza. It's worth, when I was doing the research for my book, I was looking at religion and sexuality as part of my book. And I came across this in a book on sexuality and religion. But anyway.
Oh, that's so cool. Yeah, I'm looking it up now.
Okay. See if you can. I don't know whether I've spelt it right. So you mean?
Yeah, it's
You got it. You got it.
K-A-R-E-Z-Z-A. Yeah, I will link in the episode notes. I will add this article that I just found. Apparently, it comes from the Italian word "carezza," meaning caress.
Indeed, but it was. I think it became quite. I don't know what it was in the 20th century. It started to. It has religious connections as well.
Sure.
I think.
Yeah, that is so cool.
Anyway, there's a lot of reference material I can send you if it's useful.
Yeah, absolutely. I want it all.
Sure. Yeah, I'll send you a reference for the book I got it out of.
Awesome. Yeah.
It's. I think it was called The Secrets of. I don't know, mysticism or something. It was by a guy called Versluis. I'll need to send that to you because I can't remember any of the spellings of these words, and we don't have time.
No problem. Well, so let's get into the aging part of it. I guess my first question on that is, what is one of the primary things that you wish people understood about sex, relationships, and aging, and how they all relate to each other?
Yeah. So I guess there's different things. One is that sex isn't just for young, good-looking people. I guess most people kind of know that in themselves, but there are a number of people who I see as couples, and they say things to me like, well, of course, you don't expect sex to last, as you get older. And I think, why not?
Yeah.
I mean, I think sex changes. This is the thing. I think this is important to recognize. As we get older, of course, we're not having sex to have children. And there isn't that possibility. That can be liberating on both sides, particularly.
I'm looking forward to those days.
for women, and not having to either take the pill or either of you to have to use contraception. Mm-hmm. Obviously, there are downsides, but, because the lubrication isn't so easy, and for the man, you don't get an erection so easily. But, you have lube, and it can. One of the things we say in sexual grounding, we don't tend to use the word aging. We call it ripening. Okay. So you don't eat an unripe fruit. You wait till it's ripe. It gets juicier and it gets sweeter. Mm-hmm. And it can be so with sex. Because, if you're prepared to learn about what works and doesn't work, either for you, your partner, or in general, or what is good, what feels good to you, and you can experiment when you're not fixated on getting things right. And as you say, the orgasms, you're not chasing orgasms, either of you. That can happen with age. Mm. So what I wish people knew is that they have a whole lifetime ahead of them. If I was speaking to young people, and I do work with quite a lot of young people, I can say to them, you've got your whole life ahead of you during which you can have sex. Yes. So you don't have to be in such a hurry to get it right. You can let it evolve in itself. You can learn from it. You can be much more relaxed about it. So all of those sort of things, that it's not going to stop when you reach, 35, 45, 55, 65, 75. Why should it?
Right. Your body's still working. Your body's a body.
A body is a body at that age. And equally, your capacity for intimacy increases.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Do you think that there's a correlation, what you just said, the point of an increase in intimacy? Do you think, so biologically, men hit their sexual peak in their early 20s, I think, correct?
Indeed, that's what they tell me.
And women tend to hit it later in life in their 40s and 50s. Do you think that there's a correlation there between the better sex that women tend to have as they get older and the intimacy?
Do you know, I'm not, I saw this, when I looked at the list of the questions that you sent me, and I thought, yeah, I have thought about this earlier. The way I'm thinking about it now is I'm not sure what we mean by reaching the sexual peak.
Yeah, I don't know either. It's just a thing that people say, right?
I guess for a lot of guys, we can do it a lot. It means, what is it? We could, in my 20s, boasting, you could do it 3, 4, 5 times in a day and it's not a problem, Now it's once or twice if I'm lucky, But so if that's what we mean by the sexual peak, then when we get a bit older, I'm thinking of that from my age of 69. Why is that important? I guess when I was 22, 23, I was very ignorant about what made good sex. And so obviously if it didn't feel quite good enough the first time, then I could do it again and get it better. And, typically when you're 20 something as a guy, controlling your ejaculation is much more difficult. So it swings and roundabouts. So, okay, I probably did come pretty soon the first time. So if I'm with a woman, I can say to her, well, don't worry, I'm fine for doing it again in a few minutes. You know what I mean?
20 minutes.
Yeah, they say yes. Yes. And that's fine, So that's a kind of sexual peak. And I guess for the woman, that made it a bit different because then she wouldn't worry about the fact that I'd come too soon because she knew I was up for it again. I don't know how that works. I think with women, what we were saying maybe about the menopause or maybe is getting more relaxed as they get older or more familiar with their own bodies. That might be a factor in reaching the peak later. I don't know of any research on that. I'd have to ask some of the women in my life what their experience is.
Yes, I'd definitely be interested. I've always assumed that that for men sexual peak was about libido, but for women sexual peak may have more to do with like ability to orgasm. But I could be wrong on that. So
well, I think for women, what the women I talk to, or the principal woman I talk to, which is my wife, I think that's more to do with the woman's familiarity with her own body and what makes her, what turns her on. And a lot of women, when I talk to female colleagues who do specific work with women who have difficulties in sex, letting go, having orgasm, whatever, it is about familiarity with their own body. And what they generally tend to kind of encourage women to do is to spend time exploring their bodies themselves, rather, so that they know what is, what feels good to them. So I suspect that it's more about that.
Yeah, I suspect that that's correct.
And I suppose the other thing really is also, this assumes, again, that we've got two separate beings here. But, and solo sex is great, and that's absolutely fine. But I was talking about sex in relationship.
Right.
And for a lot of women who are younger, maybe they're relating to a lot of men who don't know how to be intimate in a relationship.
Yes.
Well, I certainly didn't when I was in my 20s.
Yes, and I think that's why, I'm 30, and I think that's why a lot of women in my 20s were just talking about like what cads men are.
Yes, absolutely.
The intimacy more than anything else. So
yeah, and when you and what you were saying was that a woman needs to be in the right mindset, place, and that. My experience of what women tell me, both in my personal and professional life, is that includes this openness, vulnerability, and so on.
Oh yeah, vulnerability is a turn on.
Yeah, and so many men don't get that.
Yes.
I'm so surprised. I didn't get it myself, earlier on in my life. I have to admit, of course, it was a learning process for us all.
But I think that's why, as women, traditionally have been attracted to men who are a little bit older than they are. And I think that definitely, I have a lot of friends who are dating, and they, are dating men who are maybe 8 or 9 or 10 years older than them. And what they say is that there's just more of a maturity. And I think that has to do with it.
I think that's great. There are other kind of, there are sort of pluses and minuses to that either way, but I get what they are looking for. And it's a shame that the young men that we have don't have that level of maturity. There's a way that we think about this in sexual grounding, which kind of is also connected with Tantra a little bit.
Yes,
we say that sex needs to involve the heart as well as the genitals. And for women need to connect at a heart level before they are open at a genital level. I don't know whether that makes sense to you.
Yeah, it does, yes.
And men tend to lead more with their genitals. So what the work I do with a lot of men is to, as you say, get them to recognize that the vulnerability, which I would say another way of expressing that is an open-heartedness, will enable the woman to be relaxed, and therefore, in some sense, you said it's a turn-on. It is exactly what we're saying. Quite a lot is written about that in the world of Tantra, and as I say, Diana Richardson writes quite a lot about that. But this is also something that we work with in sexual grounding.
That's really fascinating.
And one of the, I don't know if I can go on a little bit. One of the things we were talking about men and their level of maturity and maybe being able to allow themselves to be vulnerable and not so worried about proving stuff to themselves or to other people comes down to their relationships with their fathers. And if you haven't had the example of a father who is able to be in touch with his heart and to help you to understand that opening your heart isn't life-threatening, then you're more likely as a young man to be able to open your heart to your female partner, which is the kind of maturity that a lot of your friends are looking for in a man.
Absolutely. Yeah, that's interesting too. I love how when you look at the causes, it kind of always comes back to your relationships with your parents, doesn't it?
There is an awful lot about this. And I think, a lot of, just to put in a bit of detail, I mean, tell me if I'm giving you too much here, but, one of the things that people like Freud and Reich were aware of was the whole significance of the Oedipal phase of development.
Yes.
Where I think they got it wrong in different ways, but and that having parents who responded to a 5-6-year-old child who is becoming aware of their own sexuality in a childish way at that stage. And sometimes there's a lot of prohibition about that, like don't play with your penis, don't play with your vagina, don't open your legs,
right.
For girls, and kids of that age are fascinated with their genitals and fascinated with their parents and, what's the difference and all of that, become aware of that. And there's so much prohibition on that. Yeah. And so we don't internalize a good sense of ourselves sexually. And then later on at the adolescent stage, that gets repeated, but with added hormones, and parents don't know how to react really often to their children's emerging sexuality in a supportive way.
Yeah,
Mm.
I think that's I actually was just telling my partner. So I started masturbating really, really young. I was like
Uh-huh.
3.
Mhm.
And my parents were investigated, I think, because apparently if you start masturbating young, it's a sign that you were potentially abused. And so
Oh, it's such a pity. Yeah.
yeah, and so it was I even went to a therapist a few years back and, talked to her about this. And she was like, well, you must have been abused then. And I was like, I really don't think so. But I
No.
mean, that just goes to show, like you said, people are really interested in children are really interested in their bodies and in the bodies around them. And I just think it's really sad that, that
We
they are.
pathologize it in some
Yeah,
way. I mean,
exactly.
what Willem Poppeliers says is that there is an innocence about that. So for a kid, yeah, genitals feel exciting, but
Hmm.
there's no real difference between, touching your nose and touching your vulva.
Right.
Why is it different? It's not.
Exactly.
It's a part of your body. And we have a concept that there are 4 things around sexuality. There's excitement, curiosity, innocence, and regulation. Okay. The genitals that are innocent, they're exciting, and we're curious about them. Now, obviously, when you're coming into a family, it's great. So you might want to show off your genitals to your parents or whatever. And at the same time, you have to learn at some level, it's not okay to do it at school or to do it in
Right.
front of, adults
Yes.
that are not in the family. So that's where the regulation comes in. But you can do that in a way, and I say this in my book, you can say, okay, it's fine. You've got a lovely penis. I like it. It's just like your dad's when he was, and it'll grow as big as your dad's. All of that stuff needs to be part of the child's life experience.
Yeah.
And at the same time, this is great in the family, but, don't just do it any old way because it could be dangerous. Just like you teach kids to cross the road or
Exactly.
whatever. It's the same thing. You don't have to shame them or get them to feel bad about it.
Right. Well, so that's development. We kind of like jumped from the 20s to like childhood, but
I'm
let's
so
go
sorry.
back.
Yeah. Okay.
No. It's
stick
all
with the topic.
fantastic. I just want to make sure that you get in your time to talk about your book and what you specifically want to talk about, which is sex and ripening. But I think that what we just talked about is a great background for that. It really
Well, I
sets the
think
stage.
obviously that's where you lay the foundations.
Right.
And if those foundations are there, obviously we're talking about ideal worlds, then as you develop, the whole of your sexuality moves through different phases. So obviously when we're in our 20s, sort of we're probably going to get interested in meeting, hopefully, a life partner.
Mhm.
And as we go through the 20s into the 30s, probably having some children of our own, and then negotiating the different stages of how our sexuality evolves. Right up to aging. Clearly, by that time, either you've had children or you've decided you're not going to have them. And typically in the 50s, 60s, whatever, children will leave home. So then you've got to think, well, okay, I'm not a full-time mom or dad anymore. So
Right.
Here I am in my relationship with this person. How am I going to spend the next 20, 30 years? And I guess that's a point at which a lot of people evaluate their relationships.
Mhm.
So there's 2 choices that we can make. Well, there are probably 3. Obviously, some people at that stage think, God, I'm with the wrong person here, whatever that means. I don't know. Equally, you can do what I guess from my perspective, my parents did, which was they kind of ended up being together because that's what they were comfortable with, but they ended up kind of living what I call parallel lives. Or you can say, well, this is the next stage of the adventure of our relationship. And hopefully You'd have to ask my wife about this, but I think that's where we are at the moment.
That's fantastic.
It's a lovely stage to have reached. And actually, my experience is the relationship deepens and deepens. You will never, ever find out everything about this person that you've come together with, however long you spend with them. And I think that includes sex. I mean, again, I'm talking a lot about my own life, and fair enough. I'm happy to do that.
Yeah.
But it's never the same twice, I have to say. Because it's always something a little different. I'm in a different place, she's in a different place, and it's certainly not so compulsive. We're much more relaxed about it. And, things happen. You get an erection, you don't get an erection. Nothing's a big deal.
Yeah. And at the end of the day, you have that trust between.
I think that's the important thing. Right? I'm glad you brought that word in. Yeah. I think you have to trust that there is a relationship there that has, I don't know, durability to it. That is not, you're neither of you going to think, oh dear, the sex wasn't very good the last time we did it. I'm going to go and find someone else. I mean, I'm not saying younger people do that, but it feels like, well, we've been together this time, and we're not, nobody's going anywhere. So, if it wasn't quite how we wanted it to be, we could talk, what wasn't right for you? Can we do this differently? And, how do we work on it to keep it fresh, to keep it alive, And there is a commitment there to doing that.
Absolutely. And I think what's important to remember is you can start experimenting at any age.
I think that's true. Yeah.
If you've never tried, something a little kinkier like bondage or role play, or even, something even harder than that, like you can start doing that whenever you want.
Yes, I guess you could. You may be right, and certainly that's something that some people do. I'm wondering, with that sort of, when you're looking at experimentation in that way, my concern with that, I mean, on the one hand, I think, well, if anything anybody wants to do that's consensual is fine. I mean, that's my attitude. As a therapist, I wonder what is being displaced onto that.
I understand that.
You do? Okay, I'm glad you understand that, because I think that's important. Because what I often find is things like the more, I don't know, what I would see as third things coming into the relationship. Like if you get into, say, a role play, in a way, for me, that goes against this idea of me being everything I am in my relationship.
Sure.
So,
yeah, it's a role. I mean,
it's a role. So, okay, if that's part of me, and I think, well, what is that role and what does it mean, for me? What does it symbolize? Because I guess that the bottom line is I'm a therapist. So, for me, things have a surface meaning. And things have also sometimes a symbolic meaning.
Yes.
So I'm always curious about that. That's kind of a delicate line to tread in this day and age, because I think the prevailing kind of belief is that whatever people want to do is fine. And in a way, literally, I do support that. Whatever you want to do is fine. And if it helps you to discover bits of who you are, well, fair enough. Yeah. But there are other ways of discovering who you are.
The way that I kind of look at it is, do you know the why behind the action?
Okay, that's interesting.
So let's say, this is just an example. Let's say that I'm really interested in trying something with, and this requires a lot of emotional intelligence, right? Say I'm really interested in trying something with my partner. I want to think about, so is this something that I want to do? What is the reasoning for me want to do it? Am I trying to escape something? Am I not getting something out of our emotional relationship that I'm trying to just
absolutely
here?
That's absolutely it. Yeah, you've got it. That's brilliant. That's a good understanding. Yeah.
So I think there's some people who really just do enjoy, it, and they have
absolutely, and if they do,
so
that's absolutely fine. And it's not for me. I guess it depends. It's like everything else. If whatever people like doing, if people don't want to have sex at all, or that's also fine. If they come into my consulting room and one of the couple wants to have sex and the other one is now no longer interested in it, then we have to do some processing of that and see what it means and what is and how has this arisen and so on and so forth. It might well come out, and I do say to couples this, well, if we do come to the conclusion that, one of you really just doesn't want sex and the other one really does, then you have to face that. What's the consequence for your relationship? And when we work with that.
How does that kind of play into aging, like sex drive and interest in sex? Been doing it for so long with the same person.
No, see, this is where, again, I take a slightly different attitude, because if we assume that sex is about connection, which we were saying earlier, then the concept of sex drive is not so important.
I would agree with that.
That there is it goes back to Freud, really, and to a certain extent, Reich came up with this idea of what he called cathexis and catharsis, which too complicated, was basically a build-up of some sort of charge, or like an electrical charge, and you have an orgasm, and that discharges this built-up charge. And that was a theory that was around in, the 20s and 30s, and it kind of made sense in terms of the way physiology was thought of at that time. If we see it slightly differently, that sex, we have a connection with each other, and through that connection we build up a mutual energy which could go into orgasm, then it's not a question of that we could have, I build up this backlog of sexual energy that I need to discharge by having sex, So to that extent, I'm not kind of particularly, into the idea of sex drive per se. Interest in sex, again, is I would want to be looking at interest in connection and what forms of connection somebody has or wants. So often when we restore the intimacy to the relationship, then the sexual interest rekindles itself.
Definitely. No, that's fantastic. That makes a ton of sense to me. I've never really thought about it that way before. But so there's a difference between sex drive and like interest in sex. And,
I think so.
Okay. Well, why don't you tell me a little bit about your book?
The book, okay. The book really came about because I did this training in this sexual grounding therapy, which is a psychosexual therapy. And as part of the training, I needed to write a thesis. And not very much has been written about sexual grounding therapy. The founder or the originator of sexual grounding therapies, Willem Poppeliers, is a really brilliant guy, but writing is not his strong point. So there was one kind of very small book which went into some of the theory, but I felt that what it was needed was to put the sexual grounding therapy into a context. So that's to say, so what I do in the book is I look at the whole history of sexuality and how sexuality has been thought about since the earliest times. and some of the reasons why I believe that we have so many sexual difficulties in the present day. I tend to think about that in terms of the relationship between sexuality and religion and sexuality and society, that actually if people are able to have fulfilling and satisfying sex, they are less easy to control, because then they aren't in a state of self-perceived need. So, and I don't know, I look at this in terms of things like advertising, that advertising works because we see ourselves as needing to improve ourselves, to be better people and have more. And that's often a substitute for what we really want, which is to feel fulfilled in ourselves. So I write about that. I put it into that context. I put it in the context of other psychotherapeutic methods, sort of some of the more analytic methods, some of the humanistic methods, and the sort of cognitive methods. And I also do a very brief sort of survey on other ways of working with sexuality. So I look at Tantra and sex coaching, sexological body work, and there's also an offshoot. There was other what I would call non-mainstream ways of working with sexuality. I look at the relationship between the sexual grounding therapy and science. So is there a scientific basis to it, and whether science can establish that or not? And just generally looking at where psychosexual therapy and psychotherapy in general fits in with society. So it's quite wide-ranging, the book, anyway.
Yeah, I'm sold. I'm going to pre-order it if that's possible.
It is available on Amazon in the States, or it's published by Routledge.
Yes.
I don't know. I think it is going to be printed in the States. So you might, if you get it directly from the publishers, I think at the moment it's slightly cheaper.
Okay. It's funny. I think I told you I actually used to work for that publishing company.
Oh, did you? Okay.
Yeah.
So, well, you might manage to get a discount then.
Yeah, right. Is there anything else you wanted to share before we sign off for the day?
Well, I'm just to say it's been a pleasure to talk to you, and I know I've ranged around a lot of topics, and I hope what I've said has made enough sense to you and to your listeners.
No, it's fascinating. You've been a lovely guest to have on.
Oh, well, thank you very much. I've enjoyed it.
Great. Well, everybody, thank you for listening. I am your host, Rachel. This has been Wine, Dine, and 69. Go check out Geoff's book. Geoff, what is the book called?
It's called Sexual Grounding Therapy, Context, Theory, and Practice. And it will be published on the 17th of May.
Perfect. All right, everybody, let's keep talking.